Hello there, welcome back. Thanks for sticking with us. Now then, this man next to me will need no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Ken, welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Advice Show. We were going to have a good debate today. We had Sir Steve Webb lined up to come and talk about all things to do with advisors and pension legislation. Being as this isn't Have I Got News For You, we haven't replaced him with a tub of lard, but we are going to replace him with you. This is where I want your questions, your thoughts, your opportunity to discuss the wider aspects of the advisory market today. And we'll get Ken's thoughts on where he sees the future direction for running, let's face it, a small to medium-sized financial advisory business in today's marketplace. That's really going to be the focus of our conversation. Ken, before we get stuck into that though, 2017 is a significant year for Simply Biz, the 15-year anniversary since you founded the business. What are your reflections on the key moments in those 15 years and where Simply Biz stands now in comparison to them?
Well, first of all, it's a delight to be here, but I'm much keener on looking forward than I am in looking back. Yes, it's wonderful to have achieved our 15 years, and it has been 15 years of real success. We have really helped many thousands and continue to help many thousands of independent financial advisors be more compliant and more successful. And that's basically our DNA. We provide everything a firm needs, particularly the small and medium-sized firm needs, to be successful and compliant. Compliant because you have to be compliant to be in business, and successful because we all know business is rather more fun if you're successful. And that's our DNA. And from small beginnings, we have followed that drive, and we always talk about the firms that we serve because it's those firms and those customers that are important to us. Without them, we're nothing. Yeah. And so all our focus is helping them be more successful. And looking to the future, yes, we've had many challenges as we've come through, and the regulators have changed, and all the other stuff that goes on. There's been credit crises and so on, but day by day, month by month, year by year, we've continued to help people survive those challenges and changes and go on to be more successful. To a position now, which I'm sure we'll touch on later, is that the firms that we serve are being really successful. The issue they've got is not enough time, and again, that's something we're going to be addressing to help them be more successful in the future. So yes, we've had many challenges, but interestingly, Dan, there has hardly been a month through the whole of that 15 years that we haven't ended that month with serving more firms than we started with, which is tremendous. When you think of the people retiring, businesses changing and amalgamations and so on, the absolute reality is that more and more firms find that what we deliver helps them to achieve their objectives of being compliant and being profitable and successful. Okay.
On that theme of them being successful then, if Steve Webb had been here, I think we would have got stuck into the findings of the ILC-UK survey.
Might have got stuck into Steve as well.
About the value of financial advice. What are your reflections on that bit of work that was done and what it says about the financial advisory marketplace?
Well, I think this survey, which was funded by Royal London, has really been a good piece of work, and I would recommend that everyone read it and took the time to read it, because it does reinforce the value of financial advice in all its many forms, and in particular, what it's demonstrated is that regardless of whether you're wealthy or less well off, financial advice can help you increase your savings, increase your funds at retirement. And they looked in particular at comparisons, and in round figures, the person and the individual that received advice was £40,000 better off in retirement than someone who didn't receive advice. And that number didn't vary dramatically between the level of affluence that you had. It was just that you became more effective as a saver if you had advice. And the other thing that's been overlooked by a lot of people in that report is that advantage of circa 40,000 wasn't over a lifetime.
Yeah.
That was over roughly a 10-year period that they looked at. So you multiply that up by 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of advice, and the difference between the kind of retirement and kind of future that someone will have when they retire if they've had advice compared to someone that doesn't have advice. It's absolutely dramatic. And it's really interesting as well that Jeff Prestridge, he picked this up and was full of praise for the work that had been done. And then, ironically, Nick Cacciuti, who is not necessarily a fan of the financial advice marketplace, he too, in fact, he actually criticised it when it first came out. But he has done an article recently saying that he's reread it and now realises or appreciates that it really is in-depth research. It's not just somebody guessing that it's a good idea. They've done in-depth research to demonstrate that people who take advice are better off. And for every financial advisor, it's worth reading it and then perhaps even sticking part of it up in your office, because it's such an important piece of work.
Okay, interesting. You mentioned a couple of the thoughts of a couple of high-profile journalists there. Another one would be our friend at Moneybox, Paul Lewis, who recently put his thoughts forward on the notion of the word advice and how it has been, in his opinion, hijacked by financial advisors, so that advice can only mean regulated advice. Do you think that the studies such as the ILC study really shoot some holes in that argument and can be used as such?
Yeah, they fundamentally undermine what he says. What he ought to be stressing, because he is a consumer champion, what he should be pointing out is that if you take advice from anyone other than a regulated advisor, you sign away all your consumer protections. All those hard-won consumer protections that mean that if you take regulated advice, you have those protections, the FOS and all the other things that go with it, FSCS and so on. If you just take advice from any other source than a regulated advice, you sign away all those protections. And that seems to me to be stupid. For the sake of a few hundred quid to jeopardise your future, I mean, it's just, for someone like that to make those kind of remarks, I think is using language quite carelessly.
Yeah.
What I think is also a concern, though, is not the fact that the financial advice sector has hijacked the term advice, because that's been determined by government and by the regulators, not by financial advisors. I think what is significant, though, is that we have this term guidance being bandied around, and of course we've got the we had a situation where the Chancellor referred to an advice authority and then changed it to in the budget speech, and then the civil servants very quickly changed it to guidance. But see, people do confuse guidance with advice. There's no question in my mind that they are often confused. And my personal view is that instead of using the term information, using the term guidance, they should use the term information. Because everybody knows that information is someone's going to tell you something which will increase your knowledge, but you will then have to decide, either individually or with an advisor, what you should do. Whereas if you get guidance, there's a real danger that you think that the guidance you've given actually replaces advice, and it doesn't. So, I would like to see the new amalgamated body incorporate the term information rather than guidance. Then there would be no confusion, because I think people are absolutely clear. Advice is advice, and information is information.
With the amalgamation of those different guidance services, do you think that the consumer will be worse off for the loss of those organisations and pulling them all to one together, or better off, or do you think it really is an irrelevance?
Well, I think from the point of view of all of us as financial advisors, it's probably not material. But I do think bringing them all together is an improvement, because it's bad enough having confusion over the words. If you've got a confusion over who do you go to for guidance or information, then I think that getting rid of them and having the amalgamation is going to be simpler. It also should save costs. I say should because these organisations have a tendency to increase costs rather than reduce them. You know, in a business, you bring 2 or 3 things together and you expect to save a bit of money. I don't think that's the mindset of many of the people that work in these kind of organisations. But I think it will be better for consumers to have one place to go for guidance. I just wish they'd call it information.
Right. Okay. What are the key things from your point of view that we've mentioned? You mentioned FOS and the FSCA and the levy and the regulator. What's the regulator getting right at the moment in your mind, and what are they not getting right that advisors should be keeping their eyes on?
Right. Well, I think the FSCS is the biggest issue as far as the firms that we serve are concerned, because they have seen dramatic increases in the cost of the FSCS, and so I think that getting the FSCS funding right from its currently absolutely obscene system at the moment, where financial advisors who have no way of influencing, being aware of, or affecting any of the people who are doing wrong or acting carelessly or in many cases criminally. So you've got the reckless and the criminal. Careless, well, it does happen from time to time, but there are people out there who are reckless and criminal, particularly in relation to the pension sector, which we might come on to. So I think that the way in which the FSCS is resolved is fundamentally important. I'm really concerned that it's taking so long for it to be sorted out, but I am behind the scenes working extremely hard. I don't go for headlines on the FSCS and that kind of thing, but there's a lot of work going on. And as many of your viewers will know, I've been working on this for 30 years now, and
playing the long game.
And yeah, it's a bit like pushing porridge uphill at times, often. But I think the reality is we are getting closer to a situation which will improve it. I'm not saying it will right all the wrongs, but will improve it. And then along with that, I think what we want to see is fewer claims on the FSCS. And this is where I think the managers regime that will be coming in shortly is so important, because what that is going to do, and of course this is something the FCA is getting right, is yes, it will be a bit irksome, but the reality is the firms that we serve, they are directly regulated. They know they need PI because they might make a mistake, but they are trying to do a really good job for their clients. They're doing it conscientiously, and at the same time they're making a good living. In the situation where the FCA is introducing the managers regime, they are recognising that it isn't XYZ Limited that does something wrong, careless, reckless, criminal. It is the individuals within that firm, and therefore this senior managers regime is going to put the responsibility fairly and squarely on those individuals. So for the firms that we serve, where, as I say, overwhelmingly they are working hard to do it right, the effect will be minimal. Yes, there'll be a bit more process, but we will be making sure that we make it as easy and as simple for their interests to be protected and safeguarded. But where there are firms that, generally speaking, don't take compliance services and don't try to get it right because they have a different objective completely, they are either reckless or criminal, they are now going to be personally responsible. So they won't be able to just fold a firm up and say, well, they've now gone into the sunset with their ill-gotten gains. They will be personally responsible for what they have done, and they will be subject to criminal and civil penalties. So I think that will has a real chance of significantly reducing the costs of the FSCS, and that, even on any new funding ratio, is bound to be of real benefit to the firms that we serve.
So you think that senior managers regime is overall a very positive move?
I think it's incredibly positive. It's something we should really welcome. So it'll be a bit of inconvenient, a bit of extra cost perhaps, but compared to the costs of the FSCS and compared to the angst that we all feel when somebody does something clearly wrong and then just walks away with the money. Quite frankly, it's disgraceful. Morally and practically, it's disgraceful.
Okay. We've got a question here from, I thought you'd forgotten about us for a minute, but the questions are starting to come in now. We've got one here from Stuart Lockhart. Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Stuart.
And he takes us into an interesting topic, which is around the pensions market. Is Ken surprised in the lack of funds for clients in drawdown, and essentially how few have come to market? And I think this really brings us around to the whole notion of pensions freedom. Steve Webb has been quoted as saying that he surprisingly thinks it's been a roaring success. Before we get on to Stuart's specific question about which is around innovation from manufacturers in this space, looking at pensions freedom in the broadest sense, do you agree that it's been a roaring success?
Well, it depends what you were expecting or wanting. Frankly, I have some real concerns about pensions freedom. And these concerns extend far beyond moving out of defined benefit schemes to defined contribution schemes. I think the fundamental fault with what is basically a good idea. Why shouldn't people have access to their own money?
Yeah.
So fundamentally, that's a good idea. But the savings, pensions, the purpose of pensions is to impact positively on your standard of living in retirement. What we're seeing is people at 55 accessing cash for all kinds of reasons. And had that, my first question is always when someone wants cash in that situation is, well, what would you have done 3 years ago when pensions freedom didn't exist? You wouldn't have accessed it, as simple as that, because you couldn't have done. So what I believe is happening is that people are accessing their pension funds when they actually haven't got their retirement head on.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see pension freedoms apply 6 months before your normal retirement date, so that then people are focused on how are they going to maintain their standard of living in retirement, and those kind of things, which are really very profound questions. And as I mean, most of the firms that we serve have for years advised clients at retirement, and they know the concerns that clients have. They know that if clients had had access to that money and taken it out 10 years earlier, A, they'd have had half as much, and B, what are they going to live on now? So, yes, I accept that there are certain circumstances and when accessing one's pension early can make sense. I also understand the points that in transferring from a benefit-based scheme with some of the multiples that are being talked of and being delivered now make it irresistible. But transferring and taking advantage of that situation is one thing. Then accessing the cash and spending it is quite another. And so yes, I can understand why transfers take place, but I do have the position that the objective of the pension when it was set up, either by the employer or by the individual, was to make sure that when he or she retires, there's an adequate standard of living. And anything that jeopardizes that, I think, is dangerous. So I think pensions freedom is a great facility, great idea. I would like to see it operate and be available 6 months before retirement rather than at age 55.
You think, in essence, we're that culturally it's not in tune with helping with the savings gap around across the country, and that it'll be ultimately used more as a means of accessing recklessly, to borrow your word?
Yes, at 55, people will kid themselves, well, I'm going to draw this out now, but I'm going to rebuild it over the next 10 years. It just won't happen. But there's you asked early on about what the FCA are doing right. A few days ago, they issued a paper which I think is one of their occasional papers, and I think it's one of the best papers they've ever produced. It's on it's on elderly. How are the elderly going to be funded in retirement, and what can financial services do about it? That highlights the problems that already exist. They are not going to be made any easier by people spending their retirement cash in their late 50s.
That's very interesting, very interesting. Do you think that that as a profession as a whole, not just from the advice side but from the manufacturing side, that we have that innovation has been speedy enough to catch up with the opportunity of pensions freedom?
Well, that's thank you for bringing me back to that question.
No.
I think there's always room for innovation, but then again, some of the speakers that you've already had on and interviewed today have highlighted how funds can be created to generate income as well as growth and so on, and so I'm not sure that we as advisors should be looking at drawdown funds as being fundamentally different from other methods of building portfolios that that could be done and is done on a daily basis. I think where we could see some innovation as far as funds are concerned is for retirement is trying to ensure that there's a reasonable base income because again, if I was Chancellor or Pensions Minister, I would want to see the ability for people to treat a core income in one way and a more speculative income in another way. In other words, in retirement, you've got your basic state pension, and which, thanks to something which I was instrumental in introducing behind the scenes, we now have a situation where the basic state pension basically ensures that you are not that you are above means tested benefits, and I think that's a fundamental difference because I think that will help encourage savings, as indeed pensions freedom should encourage savings, because if you can build up a bigger fund to access at 65 or 50, 60, whatever it is, whenever your NRD is, then that has to be a good thing for all of us in the financial services sector. But as far as this core question is concerned, I think there is room for innovation, but by its very nature, innovation often actually brings with it some extra risks. And so yes, let's have some innovation and see what the actuaries can produce that will give, say, a basic income that we can be confident of. So you've got your basic state pension, a rock-solid income, which perhaps is not annuity, but is linked in some way to the annuity market and therefore works for drawdown. And then your sort of speculative funding after that, where if it goes right, you'll get a better income. If it goes wrong, at least you've still got your core income. Okay.
Speaking of innovation, what's your thoughts on the digital innovation, Roboadvice, and the position of financial advisors going forward, as let's face it, more and more technology will come into play?
Yeah, I think technology is really important and is going to play a major part in the way we all work as we move forward. That's a massive leap, however. It's a massive leap from that, however, to talk about robo-advice. Yeah. And every time I talk to robo-advisors, and I try and do it fairly often, they invariably say, well, it doesn't actually work. We need people to make it work. There was a robo-advisor recently raised about another 25 million pounds, specifically so they could recruit human beings to support the advice process. And the bottom line is that robots can do a certain amount and technology can do a certain amount, but nothing can replace, in my view, the service that we as financial advisors give to our clients in terms of empathizing with the issues they have, in terms of helping them through the difficulties and so on. It's not just a number crunching exercise. It's not just about getting an algorithm that will produce the right answer. There's much more to financial advice than that. And our strength is that we have those relationships. So where I see technology and robo-advice being of such a help to the firms that we serve, and it is something that, again, we're already starting to produce and working on, is that we will use technology to help the firms that we serve save more time, because the demand for their services is just outstripping supply at the moment. And the feedback that we're getting on a regular basis is that I'm too busy to see all my clients now. what I want is something that will help me be more efficient. And that's exactly what we're delivering. So that if you're not using the Simply Biz, Simply Sites, websites, I would urge you to be thinking about that. If you're not using Simply Protect, I would urge you to really look into that, because if you're not using Simply Protect, you're actually probably not giving your clients as good a deal as you could do, nor probably getting as good a deal for yourself. So we're doing a whole range of things which, linked with technology, linked with all the advantages that technology can bring us, will enable the firms that we serve to do a better job for their clients, to do it more efficiently, more effectively, more profitably, and to be able to spend, if they wish, more time with clients.
Yep.
If they prefer to spend it on the golf course, then that's life.
And you can find more information about those next generation websites, obviously on the Simply Biz websites themselves. We've got a question here from Mark Hale, advisors got in touch. It's quite a specific one, and but I think it really gets back to that notion around the regulator and FOS and the position advisors have with those organisations. Do you have a view on clients being able to ask us to delete their data records under GDPR and then potentially complaining about advice to FOS, with the advisor then being unable to provide the information to defend the complaint, because you've got one piece of regulation and legislation on the one hand fitting against the Ombudsman's approach on the other?
Right. Mark, this is a really good question, because it's so topical with the new rules coming in the coming months, and the fact is, under MiFID II and all that goes with it, there will be this right to, in a sense, be forgotten, to have your data deleted. However, there are caveats in that which enable someone to retain data if they may need it to defend a case, for example. What is not clear is whether the fact that a case has not yet, a complaint has not yet arisen, will impact on that. And a concern I really have, and one that we're seeking clarification from FOS on, is it is nonsensical for an advisor to delete the records of a client which they may need at some future date to defend a case. We've seen so often in networks how advisors have been penalised because the evidence no longer exists and no longer available to defend the case. And you can just visualise a situation where the ambulance chasers, when they hook a client, the first thing they get that client to do is contact their advisor and say, well, please delete all my records. And then when they've had confirmation that all the records are deleted, they then slap a complaint in. It's just, it would be a nightmare scenario. And in terms of the viewers and the firms that we serve, I can absolutely assure you it's something that we're alert to, and we will be ensuring as far as we can that we get clarity from FOS on this issue.
Okay.
Personally, I wouldn't delete anything at this stage.
Right. Stuart Lockhart's back in touch. We don't want to raise your ire too much with this question, but do you think there's any likelihood of claims companies being regulated, especially any backed by failed financial advisors?
I think we'd all like to see claims companies regulated. Some of their practices have already been restricted, and I think there is a possibility. I would put it no higher than that. I don't think it's a probability, but I do think there's a possibility that they will come under greater scrutiny. I think they themselves will find the new controls on data storage and so on relevant to them, and not in a positive way. because I think it would be much harder for them to store data on people that they're going to use at some future date for ambulance chasing. But short answer is, I hope they are.
Do you think that we're doing enough as a profession of advisors together to fight the corner in the industry, and are we, from an industry body perspective, getting there or getting it right yet? Do you think?
Right. Well, we work with lots of other bodies to use our scale, and we are by far the largest independent organisation in the marketplace, and so we use our scale to ensure as far as possible that our influence and voice is heard, and we are listened to. There's no question about that, and I don't want to go into any of the details because the discussions are always in confidence, but certainly the firms that we serve can be very confident that we commit an awful lot of time and effort. Indeed, a great deal of my time and effort is devoted to exactly that, trying to protect our corner. As far as going forward is concerned, I would imagine that this is going to tend to continue. I don't see it diminishing, and I think that we can point to a significant number of successes where the excesses of a regulator or FOSS or FSCS have been impacted by some of the work we've done, but we're not where we would like to be yet.
Okay. And what do you think what are the key things going forward then? You said you don't particularly like looking back. We like looking forward from both the regulatory perspective and the landscape of financial advisors are in at the moment. Are we going to finally hear the death rattle of networks, or do we think that the future dynamic of this profession looks very different to the one that it has today?
Well, I think we've seen a significant reduction in the number of appointed representatives around, but they have a place. It's not for me to knock the competition. What I think we can be very positive about looking to the future is that the demand for independent financial advice in particular, but financial advice overall, is increasing. And when you have a situation where the government facilitates the ability for you to draw £1,500 from your pension scheme over, and not at 55, but at any age, over a 3-year period, what that is saying is that the institutions, the establishment, the government is recognising the value of financial advice. You then have reports coming out, such as the one we were talking about earlier from Royal London, where it demonstrates and reinforces the real value of that advice. It seems to me that with the support from Simply Biz, Compliance First and CIFA, the firms that we serve are in absolutely the prime position to profit from this increased awareness and recognition of the need for professional financial advice. I think bringing together the guidance information services is a positive thing. That again will increase the demand for genuine financial advice. I'm sure of that. And it is just, I'm a great believer in trends, and the trend now is absolutely towards financial advice, and the great advantage of being directly regulated, regardless of how you deliver your advice, is that you are building real value in your business, and therefore, and that's something you can never effectively achieve if you're an appointed representative. The real benefit, therefore, is that yes, you're enjoying a better lifestyle, You've got control of your own destiny, all the things that at the outset we wanted to create for the firms that we serve when we started in 2002. All of those things are even more important now. So in the same way as we are going from strength to strength within the Simply Biz group and expanding the range of services that we provide, I'm absolutely certain that the firms that we serve are going from strength to strength in profitability, professional satisfaction with the job they do, and heightened standing in the eyes of their clients, and that's very important.
Great, thank you very much, Ken. We're going to get stuck into the defined benefit transfer market very shortly. Seems like a day doesn't go by where there isn't something in the trade press about this marketplace, different players in it, what advisors could or couldn't and shouldn't be doing when dealing with clients in this area. So we're going to add to that by providing some thought leadership. We're going to get some smart people in the room and drill them on everything to do with that defined benefit marketplace. You can join us back in about, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes time, and we'll have brought that team in, and they'll be waiting ready for your questions. Don't go quiet on me. I want you to really get stuck into that last debate. So I'll speak to you in about, I don't know, 10 minutes time. See you soon. Thank you.